SEAL sniper bought a remote mountain. Poachers crossed her fence and vanished overnight. Snow erased the tracks by morning. The fence still stood. The men who crossed it did not return. Up on a mountain no one wanted, a woman who once survived war learned that silence can be louder than gunfire, and that some boundaries are never crossed twice. The fence was new enough to shine against the snow, 8 feet of steel, crowned with barbed wire that caught moonlight like broken glass. It cut the mountain in a clean, unapologetic line, something rare in a place where nature usually refused straight edges. The men didn't slow when they reached it. They moved like people who had already decided the land beyond it didn't belong to anyone who mattered. Their boots pressed deep into fresh snow, careless, confident. One laughed. Another adjusted the strap on his rifle case as if this were routine. Poachers always believed isolation meant permission. Inside the cabin, Rowan Hale stood very still. She didn't rush to the window. She didn't reach for a phone. She watched the security monitor mounted beside the stove, her face calm in a way that unsettled people who didn't understand it. The feed showed 5 figures. Their spacing was deliberate, their movements quiet, too quiet for weekend hunters. Rowan exhaled slowly. She had learned long ago that panic wasted time. The cabin smelled like pine smoke and coffee gone cold. A single lamp glowed behind her, casting soft light on the wooden star hanging in the window. It had been a gift from someone who believed even hardened places deserved symbols of gentleness. Outside, the men tested the fence. One tugged the wire. Another scanned the tree line, eyes trained, assessing. They weren't just looking for entry points. They were measuring resistance. Rowan zoomed in on the feed, gloves designed for precision, optics worth more than most people's trucks. One man paused, stared directly toward the camera, and smirked. They knew someone was watching. They crossed anyway. The fence groaned as it took their weight. Snow spilled from the wire. For a moment, everything slowed, the way it always does when a line is crossed and the world holds its breath. Rowan turned off the lamp. In the darkness, her reflection disappeared from the glass. On the mountain, the wind rose, swallowing sound, erasing intention, and 5 men stepped onto land owned by someone who had survived places far more dangerous than this. They thought the mountain was empty. They were wrong. The town below the mountain knew Rowan Hale only in fragments. A woman in her late 30s, quiet, paid cash, drove an older truck with no stickers, no statements, no need to be noticed. She bought 800 acres of land no one else wanted, too steep, too cold, too far from everything, and asked the realtor one simple thing: keep it quiet. Small towns never do. People filled the silence with guesses. Some said she was rich and hiding from something. Others decided she was afraid of the world and had climbed above it to escape. A few whispered that she must have done something wrong to want so much distance. Rowan never corrected them. She dressed for function, not attention, boots worn in at the ankles, jackets chosen for weather, not style. Her movements were economical, like every step had already been rehearsed. When she walked into the hardware store, she scanned exits without thinking. When she stood in line, she stood where she could see hands. People noticed that kind of awareness. It made them uncomfortable. What no one saw was the name she used to answer to: Petty Officer Rowan Hale. Call sign, North Star. A Navy SEAL sniper for nearly 15 years. Precision wasn't just a skill, it was a responsibility. Every shot carried weight. Every decision stayed with you. She had left quietly. No retirement party, no speeches, just paperwork and a final salute that meant more than words ever could. The mountain was her choice. Up there, she built the cabin herself, reinforced beams before the snow came, positioned windows for sightlines, not views. Tools hung where her hands expected them to be, even in the dark. The fence went up next, not from fear, but from experience, control after chaos. At night, she sometimes slept in the chair facing the window, not because she expected trouble, but because her body hadn't learned that peace could be trusted. The wooden star in the window was her only decoration. Rough-carved, uneven, human, it reminded her that life wasn't always about readiness. Most days the mountain was quiet, wind through pines, elk moving at dawn, silence so complete it felt earned. Rowan believed she had chosen a place where the past couldn't reach her. She didn't yet know that the mountain was about to test whether she still belonged to the person she used to be or the one she was trying to become. Etta Morrison was the first person to knock on Rowan's door. She didn't bring questions. She brought soup. Etta was in her late 60s, strong in the way mountain women become when life doesn't give them many breaks. Her hands were marked by work. Her eyes missed very little. She ran supply routes between town and the forest edge, knew which trucks belonged and which ones didn't. She left the container on the porch with a folded note. "Winter gets mean up here." Rowan didn't invite her inside. She didn't know how. Instead, she stood in the doorway, cold air curling around her boots, holding the warm container like it might disappear. Etta didn't push. "Your stove draw okay?" she asked. Rowan nodded. "Roof pitch looks right. Fence is tall. People'll talk." Rowan said nothing. Etta smiled, not unkindly. Let them. That was how their relationship formed. No prying, no stories demanded, just quiet understanding. Etta never asked why the fence was so high or why the cameras were placed with military precision. She asked what kind of coffee Rowan drank and remembered the answer. Sometimes she waved from her truck. Sometimes she left firewood stacked neatly by the shed. Sometimes she said nothing at all, and that was enough. Rowan hadn't realized how long it had been since someone offered help without expectation. On the mountain, the past still visited. Certain sounds carried memory. Wind hitting the ridge could feel like rotor wash. Darkness sometimes pressed too close. 7 years earlier, Rowan had lain in another mountain range with her spotter, Jason Reed. He had been steady, sharp, younger than he should have been for the weight he carried. Bad intelligence. A decision made far away. Jason didn't come home. The system moved on. Rowan didn't. The mountain had been her answer. A place where she chose the boundaries, where silence meant safety. Until Christmas Eve, when her phone vibrated against the counter and reminded her that some people mistook quiet for weakness. The alert came just after dusk. Rowan had been washing her mug when the vibration cut through the cabin, southeast perimeter. Motion triggered. She dried her hands once slowly and opened the feed. 5 men, not hikers, not lost tourists. Their spacing was wrong for that. Their pace steady, heads up. Communication done with fingers and glances. One carried a hard case too long for fishing gear. Another wore a pack built for weight. This was reconnaissance. Rowan's thumb hovered over the emergency call button. She already knew how that would go. Questions, delays. A deputy hours away, driving carefully through snow, wondering why a woman with cameras needed help on Christmas Eve. The mountain didn't wait for paperwork. On the screen, the men tested posts, followed the fence line, studied angles. One looked directly at the camera and smiled. Then they turned back into the trees. They didn't cross that night. They wanted her to know they could. Rowan watched until the feed returned to stillness. Then she sat down, not from fear, but from certainty. This wasn't over. Poachers didn't invest this kind of effort unless there was something worth taking or someone worth intimidating. She sent a brief message to Etta. "Saw activity, just a heads up." The reply came fast. "I'll keep my eyes open." Rowan stood and checked the cabin one last time before bed. Doors, windows, stove. The wooden star caught the light again. She didn't sleep. Outside, snow fell hard enough to erase tracks by morning. By dawn, the mountain looked untouched, but Rowan knew better. They returned the next night. This time they didn't test the fence. They cut it. The alert sounded once, then went dead. Rowan was already moving. She layered up, her body slipping into an old rhythm that never truly leaves you. Calm, efficient, focused. The rifle came from its case not as a weapon, but as a tool she understood deeply. She moved through the trees like she belonged there because she did. The men entered through the breach, laughing softly, confident the storm had bought them cover. They didn't see the trip line until it was too late. One fell hard, another cursed. Panic rippled, not loud but sharp. Rowan never fired. She didn't need to. Floodlights snapped on, blinding. Speakers hidden in the trees came alive, not with warnings but with sound. Rotor wash, radio chatter. Recorded chaos layered so perfectly it froze them where they stood. Old instincts betrayed them. Shadows moved where no one stood. Red dots appeared, vanished. Footsteps circled, never revealing their source. One man screamed. Another ran straight into the cold, into terrain that punished haste. By morning, the mountain was silent again. 5 sets of tracks went in. Only 3 came out. The others were found days later, alive, shaken, uninjured, wandering miles away, unable to explain what had happened except for one detail they all agreed on. The mountain was not empty. The first man stumbled out of the trees just after dawn. Etta Morrison saw him from her truck as she rounded the bend below the ridge. He was barefoot, clothes torn, face gray with something deeper than cold. He raised his hands when he saw her, not in surrender, but in confusion, like he wasn't sure where he was anymore. Etta slowed, rolled down her window an inch. "You lost?" she asked. The man swallowed. "That mountain, it's not empty." That was all he said before turning and walking away, deeper into the valley, like he was afraid the trees might hear him speak again. By noon, rumors moved faster than weather. 3 men showed up in town, shaken, dehydrated, silent. They refused medical help, wouldn't answer questions. One kept staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. Search teams went up the mountain for the missing 2. They found them alive, huddled near a frozen creek, wrapped in their own fear more than their jackets. No injuries, no weapons, just eyes that flinched at every sound. The sheriff asked questions. There were no answers that fit into reports. No gunshots, no traps, no visible attacker, just stories that didn't line up and a mountain that refused to explain itself. Rowan watched it all from a distance. She didn't come down. She repaired the fence before noon, hands steady, movements precise. The cut wire went into a scrap pile, evidence of disrespect removed like a bad habit. Etta drove up later that day. "They won't come back," she said quietly. Rowan nodded. "They think you're a ghost." Rowan didn't smile. "Good." Etta studied her. "You didn't hurt them." "No, but you could have." "Yes." That hung between them longer than words. Etta placed a hand on the fence post. "This land, it keeps what you give it." Rowan looked out across the ridge, the snow settling again, covering mistakes. "Then I gave it restraint." That night the mountain was quiet in a different way. Not peaceful, resolved. Rowan slept in her bed for the first time in days, and dreamed of nothing at all. 3 days later, a government SUV climbed the road. Rowan saw it from the ridge and felt something old tighten in her chest, not fear, but recognition. Systems had a smell to them. Order, intent, memory. The man who stepped out wore civilian clothes, but his posture gave him away before his face did. Commander Lucas Bennett. He removed his gloves slowly, eyes scanning the perimeter, the terrain, the fence rebuilt stronger than before. When he reached the cabin, he waited, didn't knock, just stood where she could see him. Rowan opened the door. "North Star," he said softly. She didn't correct him. "They told me you vanished," he continued. "Guess they were wrong." Rowan stepped aside. He didn't enter. "I'm not here officially," Bennett said. "No reports, no paperwork. But 5 armed men disappear overnight on private land, and old instincts wake up." Rowan met his gaze. "You taught me that." A pause. "I read the statements," he said. "They don't make sense." "They don't need to." Bennett nodded. "You crossed a line." Rowan's voice was calm. "They crossed mine." He looked at the wooden star in the window. "You're not the same person you were." "No," she agreed. "I survived her." Bennett exhaled. "You could have ended this differently." "So could they." Silence again, respectful, heavy. "I won't come back," he said finally. "Neither will anyone else." Rowan watched him leave, the SUV disappearing down the mountain like a closing chapter. The past had knocked. She hadn't invited it in. Winter deepened, snow fell heavier, days shortened. Silence pressed closer, but it no longer felt threatening. Rowan settled into a rhythm that didn't require vigilance every second. The mountain had learned her boundaries, so had the people below. Hunters avoided the ridge. Poachers found other valleys. The fence remained untouched, not because it was unbreakable, but because it was understood. Etta visited more often. Sometimes they drank coffee without speaking. Sometimes Etta talked about weather patterns, road conditions, small-town nonsense. Rowan listened, grounding herself in ordinary sound. One afternoon, Etta said, "You ever think about leaving?" Rowan considered it. "I used to think leaving was survival. And now I think staying is." She fixed a loose board on the porch that evening. Simple work, honest, the kind that didn't echo afterward. That night, Rowan dreamed of Jason again. By late spring, the mountain had changed its voice. The wind no longer howled like a warning. It moved through the trees with patience, brushing pine needles together the way fingers touch pages. Rowan noticed it the way she noticed everything, without trying to own it. She no longer slept in the chair. The rifle stayed in its case more often than not. Not because she had forgotten how to use it, but because she had learned she didn't need to prove anything anymore. Some nights she still woke suddenly, heart racing, body braced for a danger that wasn't there. But now she let herself breathe afterward. She stayed still. She listened. And when nothing followed, she let the quiet stay quiet. That was new. Etta noticed the difference before Rowan did. "You walk lighter," she said one afternoon, watching Rowan mend a gate. "Like you're not waiting for the ground to give way." Rowan considered that. "I think the ground finally trusts me." Etta smiled. "Or maybe you finally trust it." They worked in companionable silence. No urgency. No ghosts crowding the space between them. That night, Rowan sat on the porch and watched the stars appear one by one. The wooden star in the window glowed softly behind her. She realized she hadn't thought about the men in weeks, not with anger, not with satisfaction. They had become part of the mountain's memory, not hers. For the first time in years, something important loosened its grip, the need to be ready for everything. The past didn't disappear, it simply stopped chasing her. And that, Rowan realized, was its own kind of victory. Summer brought hikers, respectful ones. They stayed below the fence, took photos, asked permission before stepping anywhere near her land. Word had spread without details, the way real warnings always do. Rowan watched them sometimes unseen, noting how carefully they moved. She liked that, liked the unspoken agreement. One afternoon, a young couple left a note at the gate. "Thank you for keeping this place safe." Rowan read it twice, then once more. She had spent so many years protecting others from threats they would never see. It felt strange, almost overwhelming, to be thanked for protecting a place instead of a mission. She buried Jason's dog tags near the ridge that evening, not as an ending, as a settling. "This is where you can rest," she said quietly. The mountain held the words without echo. When the county finally sent an official letter months later, Rowan didn't open it right away. She knew what it would say. No further action required. Case unresolved. Private property respected. Systems always spoke like that. Clean, distant, done. She burned the letter in the stove and watched the paper curl into nothing. Some closures didn't need to be documented. Etta raised an eyebrow. "Feel lighter?" Rowan nodded. "I don't owe anyone an explanation anymore." That realization settled deep. Strength, she had learned, wasn't domination. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even control. Strength was restraint backed by certainty, and she had earned that. Winter returned the way it always did, quiet, deliberate, unapologetic. On Christmas Eve, Rowan lit a single candle and set it by the window beside the wooden star. Snow fell gently this time, not angry, not sharp. No alerts came, no footsteps tested the fence. Rowan poured coffee and sat by the fire, fully present, no scanning, no listening for what might go wrong. Outside, the mountain slept. Inside, so did the past. Years later, people would still talk about the mountain, about the fence that stayed uncut, about the land that watched back, about the woman who lived there quietly and left the world better than she found it. Rowan Hale never corrected the stories. She didn't need to. She had learned that peace didn't require witnesses, only boundaries held with integrity. On clear mornings, she still stood at the ridge, breathing in cold air, grounded and unafraid. The mountain remained. So did she. Some battles end with noise.